Magic systems have been the topic of quite a few discussions in the fantasy community as of late. Much of the discussion surrounds epics like the Stormlight Archive or Lightbringer or the Wheel of Time. Some prefer the logic and rules of hard magic systems, and some prefer the wonder and possibility of soft magic systems, while others find a happy medium leveraging the strengths of both sides. All that being said, with a few exceptions, most of the time in such discussions, Percy Jackson's magic system is either not brought up, or when it is either criticized for not doing that much, or, even if it's praised, there's a lot of important details getting left out. Personally, it's one of my favorite magic systems in all the fantasy I've read, watched, or what have you. Not saying it's one of the best systems ever, just that it is well explored, affects the story in a significant way, and it ties into the themes very well in my opinion. So how exactly can I make a claim like that? Minor spoiler warning for all the books in the main series, by the way. The Sun and the Star and Chalice of the Gods included. Let's start at the most important point, and coincidentally, the one everyone seems to forget about when discussing the magic in this world, and that's the mist. On the surface, it's just Rick's justification for why the mortal world doesn't know about the magical world, in that its primary function in the story is preventing mortals from seeing anything they wouldn't understand. However, upon closer examination, it's actually a sneaky bit of social commentary. Human beings, as a rule, prefer to maintain the status quo, even when it causes trouble, and especially when it's easy and any suffering can just be brushed aside. It says a lot that whenever Percy is in school, the mist makes teachers, the non-monster ones at least, see a problem, but in a way that frames Percy as the troublemaker, something that will be painfully familiar to anyone who was bullied in school. Due to outside factors such as funding, teachers are often unable or unwilling to properly deal with bullies, so when presented with a problem, they just do whatever is easiest for them. And this often means doing nothing, or scolding, or even victim blaming, which we see in the series as well. It's just easier to believe in a student behaving bad than it is to actually figure out what happened, whether or not monsters are involved. Even when characters use the mist to trick their enemies, it's by showing them what they want to see. There are even moments when the gods themselves are impressed by the mental gymnastics humans are willing to do in order to concoct an explanation for the magical events that fits their current worldview. As such, most people don't know about the mythical world, but some are willing to look past the easy but ultimately untrue answer and see the uncomfortable truth. Others don't have as much to say in the matter due to the fact that they are a part of it. If you're a fan of the series, you all know how it works by now. Demigods born whenever a god falls for a human can grow up unaware of their semi-divine status. Many unfortunately don't if a wayward monster happens to figure out what they are, or the demigod figures it out on their own. In which case, they're stuck in the mythological world and can only try to live a normal life if they're so inclined. However, there is one other aspect of this series to consider. The more powerful the demigod, the less likely they can avoid that life. Monsters' ability to sense a given half-blood is proportional to the power of said half-blood. For the children of the Big Three, since they are the most powerful, them discovering their true heritage is a full-on inevitability. Unless they die. So, what we have here is a clear direct relationship between the challenges a character must face and how powerful they can become. This is more often than not leads to the character frustrated with their predicament until they accept who they are and use it to their advantage, and that makes them powerful. In other words, what makes you different can come with its own challenges, but it's also what makes you strong. That's the core message of the series. A simple one, sure, but it's well crafted and subtly woven into the entire story. With all that said, let's get to the additions made by the Heroes of Olympus, because that series adds a whole lot more nuance to how demigod powers work. Demigods in Percy Jackson and the Olympians use their powers very sparingly. Even children of the Big Three mainly rely on sword or bow for fighting, only using their powers in a pinch or when they happen to be useful. But in Heroes of Olympus, that changed. Even existing characters started using their powers a lot more often, using their powers in combat to the point where it is now commonplace. And as such, we get a lot more exploration of what powers the characters can have and the problems they can be used to solve, such as charm-speaking your enemies to trick them, overwhelming your enemies with water, metal, fire, or lightning, even seeing the future to pull what information you can. But that isn't all. Even established abilities within a cabin's worth of demigods can vary. For an example of that, let's look at Will Solus, son of Apollo. Apollo is the god of many things: archery, the sun, music, poetry, and medicine and plagues, oddly enough. When we see him in Heroes of Olympus and Trials of Apollo, Will is a gifted healer, but he can also create light to an extent, and make a high-pitched whistle that can stun enemies. But Will directly states that despite being a son of the god of archery, he isn't the best archer. He's certainly good, but his siblings are much better. And despite his sonic power, he states that he isn't the best musician at the cabin either. So there's a broad variety of abilities that a demigod of a particular godly parent can have, but even then, what abilities any individual can have and how powerful they are varies from person to person. It goes to show that in this world, everyone is different, even within one source of power. But that's not all. There is still the potential for growth, as we've seen demigods discover new abilities or new levels of power for existing abilities in the heat of battle or other dire situations. This can be a result of experiencing hardship, or from the demigod in question accepting a side of themselves they previously shunned. Though it's also believed that the opposite can be true, mainly the idea that Thalia can't fly due to her fear of heights, a hindrance her brother Jason doesn't have. There is also the possibility that some Roman counterparts grant different abilities from the Greeks, but that's mainly speculation. Hazel Levesque is arguably an exception to this, but her powers were mainly the result of a curse. That about does it for most demigods within the series, but we still need to touch on the other ways someone can be born with a power. They can be the child or even distant descendant of a magical being other than a god. Descendants of witches can have the ability to control the mist or even use magic, something normally reserved for the children of Hecate. But there's also legacies or descendants of demigods which can inherit some abilities from their divine ancestors. Usually this is one ability, if any at all, but this one ability can still be quite powerful or useful in the right situation. There is one other way a demigod can gain an ability within the series, and that's if their divine ancestor blesses them with one very powerful ability. This is incredibly rare due to just how dangerous these abilities can be. For example, a child of Hephaestus blessed with pyrokinesis accidentally caused a massive fire. And even if that child survives, they can still suffer a lot in life due to their ability they don't fully understand, such as accidentally charm speaking to make people do things they wouldn't normally do and getting in trouble for seemingly incomprehensible reasons. But there is one big elephant in the room we need to address when it comes to blessed abilities, and that elephant's name is Frank Zhang. Frank is a child of Mars, the Roman war god, but on his mother's side, he's a distant legacy of Poseidon. He has the typical abilities you'd see from a child of Mars, albeit a very powerful one, but his legacy ability is not one of the usual Poseidon powers we'd see from Percy, like water manipulation or sea animal communication. Instead, Frank can shapeshift. He can turn himself into any animal or even mythical creature, though we only see him do this to turn into a dragon. And he can change size from the animal whose form he takes, like a giant snake or a teenage boy-sized koi fish. And he's a very distant descendant of Poseidon. His whole family, dating all the way back thousands of years to the Prince of Pylos, has the same power, as opposed to most legacy abilities or blessed abilities, which last a few generations at most. In fact, Frank is so powerful that he was described as having been born with too many gifts, and was cursed by having his life tied to a piece of firewood. This does not happen to every character who is a legacy and a demigod. There is one character in Camp Jupiter classified, so it appears to be mostly exclusive to Frank because of him being a very powerful child of Mars, on top of having the ability to shapeshift. This is also due to how fate dictated his life around the prophecy he was to be a part of fulfilling. So in short, what does all this mean? It is exactly as I said at the beginning of this video. It's very simple on the surface, but the magic system in the Camp Half-Blood Chronicles is also tied into the themes and messages of the series. The mist is not just a way to explain how the magical world stays hidden, but a very literal manifestation of the idea that people only see what they want to believe, mainly what's easiest for them to believe. Whereas the increased hardship a character faces corresponding to how powerful they can become is a manifestation of the idea that what makes you different is what makes you strong, which is compounded by the ways that what powers any individual can have vary even if they have the same divine ancestor. And that about does it for the primary magic system in the series. I didn't even touch on the other ways of gaining powers in this world, such as making a pact with a god or titan, or the powers that come with being a Roman praetor. I also didn't touch on Kane Chronicles or Magnus Chase, but there isn't too much to say about them because aside from not knowing too much about what powers most Norse demigods have, those series mostly explore and explain their magic systems. Also, because Rick doesn't really take full ownership of the magic systems in those series, nor did he use them to explore the themes of the story in the same way he did in the main series. And that's it for this video. Are there any other aspects of the Riordan verse that you don't think get enough discussion in the fandom? Let me know in the comments below. I'm Kieran Mythos, and I'll see you all next time, demigods.